In the peaceful silence of the Montana countryside, a curious bobcat named Jasko sits attentively, ears perked up, eyes closed in contentment as the gentle notes of a piano drift through the air. And sometimes he curls up right on the piano keys, sleeping soundly. Jasko isn't just curious, he truly loves music. While his siblings play and hunt like normal kittens, Jasko is drawn to something entirely different. The sound of piano music echoes from the sunroom of the sanctuary. No matter the day, he will wait by the door whenever he hears the piano bench move. Every melody, whether lively or gentle, seems to speak directly to him, bringing an unmistakable peace to his wild heart. Why does this wild creature find comfort in human music? This is the story of Jasko, a curious bobcat with a heart that loves music. Margaret Maggie Thornton has seen many injured wild animals in her 30 years running the Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary in the Montana countryside. But the sight that greeted her on that foggy October morning still made her heart tighten. A wildcat, clearly a female judging by her smaller size, lay curled up on the shoulder of Highway 89. Her hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and her breathing was shallow and ragged, as if it could give out at any moment. Maggie whispered, slipping on her thick leather gloves as her husband, Tom, carefully pulled the rescue truck over to the side of the road. The bobcat's golden eyes opened wide, wild with pain and fear, but she was far too weak to do anything more than bare her teeth in a feeble warning. Tom, a big, gentle man who had spent his retirement years helping Maggie run the sanctuary, slowly maneuvered the carrier into place, while Maggie leaned closer, her rough, work-worn hands checking for other injuries. She murmured, her voice low, eyes fixed on the trembling little body. Maggie sat in the back seat, eyes fixed on the struggling bobcat, watching every faint sign of life, while Jake, her teenage grandson, drove with a caution far beyond his years. Jake had been living with them for the past year, ever since his parents' messy divorce. He'd found comfort in caring for injured animals and had grown increasingly attached to the old upright piano that took up most of their sunroom. Bobcats rarely adapted well to captivity, even temporary, and the stress of a severe injury on top of a pregnancy could easily be fatal. When their rescue truck finally rolled through the old iron gate of the sanctuary, Dr. Patricia Reeves, the sanctuary's trusted vet and Maggie's best friend since high school, was already waiting for them. "Bring her straight into surgery," Patricia called out, her gray hair pinned neatly back, her eyes sharp but kind. "I've got everything ready." The next few hours were a blur of urgent work. The bobcat, whom Jake had named Melody because her pain cries sounded strangely musical, had a broken femur and several cracked ribs. But Melody was a fighter. By nightfall, she was stable, resting in one of the outdoor recovery enclosures, tucked into clean straw with a warm heat lamp overhead. "She'll need at least 8 weeks before we can even think about releasing her," Patricia said as she peeled off her surgical gloves, her voice tired but hopeful. "And those kittens? They could come any day now." Tom scratched his salt and pepper beard thoughtfully. "The big enclosure next to the sunroom is empty," he said, an idea already forming in his mind. "Close enough to keep an eye on her, but far enough from the other animals." "Perfect," Maggie agreed with a nod. "And the music might help calm her down too." They'd learned this over the years. Many of their rescued animals seemed to settle more easily when the gentle notes of classical music drifted out from the sunroom where Jake practiced. The boy had inherited his musical gift from his late great-grandmother, though he'd only picked it up again after moving in with them. 3 days later, Melody gave birth to 4 tiny spotted kittens just before dawn broke. Maggie watched through the security camera, her heart easing as she saw Melody carefully clean each one, her movements surprisingly gentle despite her twisted leg. 3 females and 1 little male, all healthy, all nursing well. "They're beautiful," Jake breathed, eyes fixed on the screen as his breakfast sat forgotten. "Can I name them?" "Of course," Tom said with a warm, gentle smile. "As long as you remember, they're wild animals, not pets. They'll be released with their mother when they're strong enough." Maggie added, her eyes soft as she looked at Jake, who nodded solemnly. "I'll call them Aria, Harmony, Rhythm." He paused, eyes landing on the lone little male who was already pushing his sisters aside to nurse. "And Jasko." "Jasko?" Maggie raised an eyebrow, fighting back a grin. "Sounds like something out of that old music theory book in the attic." It's just a nickname for another scale. Come on, Grandma. Jake grinned wide, his eyes bright as he watched the stubborn little kitten. Look at him. You can tell he's going to be something else. Weeks passed and the little Bobcat family thrived in ways no one could have imagined. Melody's leg healed at an incredible pace, and her kittens grew fast, from blind, squeaking furballs to playful, mischievous, spotted bundles of energy that never seemed to sit still. Life at the sanctuary settled into its familiar rhythm. Feeding time, cleaning pens, medical checkups, and of course, Jake's daily piano practice, steady as the sunrise. And it was during one of those seemingly ordinary practice sessions that everything changed. Jake was carefully working through a particularly challenging Chopin nocturne, the melancholy notes drifting out through the open sunroom window and into the evening air. Maggie was nearby in the kitchen preparing the animals' evening medicine when she heard Jake's startled, excited laugh. Sitting on the floor was Jasko, the stubborn little lynx. His bushy ears were cocked forward, his head tilted back and forth, as if he were really following the melody. "He's been sitting there for 10 minutes, Jake whispered, his fingers still resting lightly on the keys. "Watch what happens if I stop." He lifted his hands. The music stopped. Immediately, Jasko began pacing back and forth, letting out small, sharp cries, the kind Bobcat kittens usually use to call their mother. Tom, who had joined them by then, chuckled in disbelief. "Play something else," he suggested. Jake nodded and switched to a lively Scott Joplin ragtime. Instantly, Jasko plopped down again, his short tail twitching back and forth in a rhythm that almost matched the music. When Jake slipped into a slow, mournful Bach fugue, Jasko lowered himself fully, resting his chin on his front paws, eyes half closed as if he were soaking up every note. From that day on, Jasko became Jake's most loyal audience. While his sisters tumbled and wrestled and explored every corner of the enclosure, Jasko could always be found pressed up against the fence during practice time, waiting for the first notes to drift his way. Maggie gently opened the wooden door connecting the outdoor enclosure to the warm, sunlit sunroom, a crucial step for the Bobcat family to start getting used to the wider world. This door let them roam freely, sniffing out new scents and sounds while staying safe under watchful eyes. It was part of preparing them for the day they'd return to the wild, familiar with different spaces, but never forgetting their boundaries. The first time the door swung open, the three sisters, Aria, Harmony, and Rhythm, crept in cautiously, noses twitching as they sniffed every corner, then quickly scampered back to Melody, still true to their wild instincts. But Jasko was different. He didn't hesitate for a second. Ignoring his sisters, Jasko walked straight toward the piano, where Jake sat frozen on the bench. Jasko circled the piano twice, tail stiff, nose nudging the keys as if trying to uncover the secret of the sounds that had fascinated him since he was just a blind mewling fuzzball. Then, in one swift leap that made both Tom and Maggie hold their breath, Jasko jumped right up onto the bench, settling beside Jake, like a tiny, furry fellow musician. "What do I do now?" Jake whispered, barely daring to move his fingers. Jake swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as they found the keys. A gentle clair de lune floated into the sunroom, drifting over Jasko's alert ears. The Bobcat hunched down, eyes half closed, looking for all the world like a little guest sipping tea at a private concert. The weeks that followed felt like pure magic. While Melody and her other kittens stayed true to their wild nature, stalking, pouncing, climbing, always wary of humans, Jasko seemed to have chosen his own path, a life devoted to music. But the strangest thing was the sound he made. Whenever Jake played something he liked, Jasko would start to purr just like a house cat, except twice the size. 40 years working with wildlife, and I've never seen anything like this, Patricia said in disbelief during a checkup, watching Jasko sit statue still next to the piano, eyes closed, tail flicking gently in time with the music. There's no scientific explanation for it, and no one really wants one, because sometimes the most magical things are best left for the heart to understand. "Maybe he's just special," Jake said softly, his fingers brushing over the keys, while Jasko sat close by, eyes locked on every movement, as if he didn't want to miss a single note. The bond between the boy and the little Bobcat kept growing quiet but undeniable, even though Maggie and Tom always made sure to keep the right distance. Jasko was never treated like a pet. No cuddling, no hand feeding, no soft humanizing of his wild nature. He was and would always be a wild creature, and they respected that. But to deny the connection, Impossible. Then came one cold November morning that changed everything. Jake hadn't been feeling well for a few days. Everyone thought it was just a simple cold. But that morning, when Maggie didn't see him come down for breakfast, her heart sank. She found him still in bed, pale as a sheet, drenched in sweat, breathing in ragged gasps as if the air itself had turned against him. "We're taking him to the hospital. Now." Tom's voice was firm as he grabbed his wallet and keys without another word. The diagnosis hit them like a punch. Severe pneumonia, made worse by an undiagnosed asthma condition. Jake was admitted immediately, strapped to an oxygen mask, IVs dripping antibiotics into his veins, eyes fluttering in and out of restless sleep for days. For 3 endless days, Maggie and Tom took turns sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering their hopes that he'd fight through. Back at the sanctuary, Jasko knew something was terribly wrong. He sat by the door leading to the sunroom, the place where nocturnes used to drift into the wild air every day. He chirped, paced, let out soft, raspy calls, waiting for a sound that never came. He refused to eat, ignored all of Melody's attempts to groom him, just pacing, tapping at the gate, then turning to stare back at the house as if a single note might call his friend home again. Patricia, during her daily checkup, warned them softly, "If this keeps up, that little Bobcat's going to make himself sick." Jasko was losing weight. He refused to eat, growing thinner each day just because one person wasn't there. "What else can we do?" Tom asked, his voice raw from the long nights at the hospital. "There's no way we can explain to him where Jake is." And it was Maggie who found a way. That night, she took Jake's phone to the hospital. She sat quietly beside his bed until he woke, pale but still trying to smile. She placed the phone in his hand and opened a simple keyboard app. "Just a little tune, sweetheart." For Jasko, he darted straight to the piano, leapt up onto the bench, and looked around wildly for the boy he couldn't find. When he realized Jake wasn't there, he let out a long, heart-wrenching cry that made Maggie's chest tighten. But that night, he ate a little, a tiny victory. But for Maggie, it was everything. Jasko would listen, then curl up on the piano bench, as if guarding Jake's seat until he returned. His sisters had long lost interest in the indoor space, but not Jasko. He stayed loyal like a promise waiting to be kept. And then, the day they'd been waiting for finally came. Jake came home, 15 pounds lighter, pale and worn, but smiling. When the car pulled onto the gravel drive, Jasko was out in the enclosure with Melody. But the moment Jake's feet touched the ground, that small, tufted head snapped up. He raced to the fence and let out a string of chirps, high-pitched and thrilled. "Hey, buddy," Jake croaked, his voice still rough. "Remember me?" What happened next became legend at the sanctuary. Jasko, the Bobcat who'd never made a sound like it before, let out a clear, perfect C, D, E, a scale, plain as day. Jake just gaped at him, eyes wide with wonder. He's playing a scale. "It's probably just a coincidence," Tom muttered. But even he didn't sound convinced. Despite the doctor's strict orders to rest, Jake insisted Tom help him to the sunroom, that little sanctuary he now shared with Jasko alone. The moment he sank onto the piano bench, before his fingers even touched the keys, Jasko silently slipped through the connecting door, padded over, and hopped up beside him like a loyal guardian. "I can only play a little," Jake whispered, his voice still hoarse. His thin fingers trembled, but when they pressed the keys, the notes rose soft and warm, like a quiet promise. When the music faded, Jasko did something no one expected. He lifted a paw and carefully pressed a key. Plink. Then another. Plonk. Not random. He played a simple piece. Ode to joy. Bright and gentle. A thank you whispered to life itself. Jasko pressed closer. So near Jake could feel the wildcat's warmth and the steady rise and fall of his breath. No one had ever petted Jasko like a house cat. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. Just being near each other was enough. As Jake regained his strength, their daily piano sessions became a sacred ritual. But then the real test came. Just as December wrapped the world in cold mist and quiet, Melody, along with her 3 other kittens, was ready to return to the wild. They were grown, strong, hunting with skill, their wild instincts fierce, and their healthy distrust of humans firmly back in place. Montana's winter was unseasonably mild, perfect for setting free those wild hearts back where they belonged. But then there was Jasco the Bobcat who played the piano. What would they do with him? But what about Jasco? Patricia didn't mince words during the final assessment. He won't survive in the wild. Maggie sat silent for a long moment, fingers brushing the edge of the papers in her lap. "So, what do we do?" she asked, though deep down she already knew the answer. "He stays." Tom's voice left no room for doubt. "We've had animals we couldn't release before because of injuries, because of disabilities. Jasco is the same, only his wound isn't on his leg or wing, it's somewhere else." Patricia sighed, eyes drifting to the misty tree line outside the window. "But he's not technically injured. Fish and Wildlife might not approve the permit. There's no legal reason to keep him." And that was when Jake, thin but unwavering, spoke up as if he poured all the strength left in him into those words. "What if we can prove he has educational value?" The room went dead quiet. He paused, breath shallow but his eyes bright with resolve. "It's worth a try, isn't it?" No one argued. When Melody and her 3 daughters were finally released, the sun spilled like soft mist, wrapping the farewell in a gentle light of bittersweet freedom. They brought Melody and her girls to a secluded forest, rich with prey trails, deep shadows, and clear streams, a place where instinct could roam free, while Jasco's melodies would live on elsewhere. Watching Melody lead her daughters into the forest, tails held high and steps sure, everyone knew this was the dream at the heart of every wildlife rescue. A wild family returned to the wild free and whole. Jasco stood behind the fence, eyes fixed on his mother and sisters as they disappeared behind the trees. He should have gone with them, but when Jake pressed a single questioning note on the outdoor keyboard they'd set up, Jasco turned his back to the forest and walked toward the music instead. "Are you sure, buddy?" Jake asked softly, his voice laced with worry and warmth. Jasco's answer was simple. He hopped onto the bench and added his own soft plink to the melody drifting through the Montana air. The permit was approved on Christmas Eve, a small miracle in the middle of a bitter winter. Jasco was now an official permanent education resident of the sanctuary. News of the piano-playing Bobcat spread like wildfire online, drawing visitors from all over just to catch a glimpse of this wild tune. But the real magic didn't live in crowded shows. It hid in the quiet moments. In the early mornings, when Jake practiced scales before school and Jasco climbed up beside him, curling into a silent ball of fur and listening. In the drizzly afternoons, when the boy tapped out new songs on the battered keys and Jasco sometimes added a note, just enough to turn practice into a small conversation. In the evenings, when Tom pulled out his old harmonica, Maggie hummed along, and the Bobcat lay still under the warm lamplight, amber eyes watching his chosen family. "You know something?" Jake said one day as spring warmth crept back into Montana. He ran his fingers across the worn piano keys, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think it was just Jasco we rescued. We all got rescued. I got pulled out of my anger over the divorce. You and Grandpa got pulled out of the empty nest. Even this old piano got pulled out of its silence." Maggie watched her nephew and the unlikely music partner by his side and thought of all the creatures they'd saved over the years. Each one deserved care and love, but Jasco had given them something more, a quiet reminder that sometimes the deepest connections come from the most unexpected places. And in that sunroom, as the last light of day laid stripes of gold across the wooden floor, a boy and a bobcat sat side by side, weaving a small, wild song together, where the untamed met the human heart and found a home. And in that sunroom, as the last light of day laid stripes of gold across the wooden floor, a boy and a bobcat sat side by side, weaving a small, wild song together, where the untamed met the human heart and found a home. The piano notes drifted out, gentle yet steady, and Jasco added his soft pling, a wild note threading through human melody, and in that little corner of Montana, everything felt complete. Outside, the wind carried their song through the mountain ridges, where perhaps, somewhere deep in the wild, a mother bobcat and her young might have heard it and tucked it away in some hidden memory. But they now belonged to the wilderness, to the freedom they deserved. And Jasco, he had chosen his own path, no longer just a silent predator of the deep forest, but a keeper of small notes, an unlikely artist of the wild, He belonged to the music, and perhaps he always had.